been a former visa officer. I worked all around the world doing visas for the US government for many years at embassies and consulates. I did over 60,000 visa interviews, making decisions on those important visa applications. And today we're going to take the opportunity to take some questions, take some comments, try to see what kind of issues you're facing out there in your visa journey. And we're going to see if I can give you some good information that's going to not only help you with your specific case, but maybe to the other people that are watching us today too. Answering these questions is going to give you a lot of general information about how to approach the visa interview, what's the best thing to do to prepare yourself for success, to maximize your chances of passing your visa interview the first time, and also how to go about passing your visa interview if you've been refused in the past. So this is general information. Again, I'm going to get questions from people and I'm going to answer them as best as I can with the limited amount of information that I'm going to get from you today with a short question. Now that's the best we can do in this scenario, in this format. The best way to do this is obviously through a real consultation with me or one of my colleagues who are all former visa officers who've worked in over 35 countries around the world, speak 14 different languages. We will get into all the details about your case. Figure out exactly what's going on, what are the highlights, what are the hurdles, what do you need to focus on, and give you a strategy that's going to prepare you for success in your visa interview. So let's see, do we have any questions coming in here yet? Okay. WeFly says, I've spent 5 months in the US to prepare for my dental board exam and then went back to the UAE. After 2 months, I received interview invitation, so I have to go back to the US. My F1 was denied. I'm guessing your F1 was denied because you spent 5 months in the US on a B1, B2 visa. This is something that I'm sorry that you weren't prepared for beforehand and you didn't know about this. The B1, B2 visa, although the maximum allowed time in the US is 6 months, most times when you enter, if you spend an extended amount of time in the US, they are not going to look on that kindly. They're going to assume that you've been doing something in the US that you were not supposed to do. And that means working. They assume that you were working in the US if you stay in the US for 5 months, because that's longer than vacation time. And for preparing for the dental board exam, they might have problems with that. Now, obviously, this is a legitimate use of the visa to go and prepare, right? You can do incidental study that's not degree granting, preparing for that, enrolling in I'm not sure what the name of that test is, but the dental exam board test. But you have to go into the next interview extremely prepared to explain this. You can't be passive. If you're passive, all they're going to see is 5 months in the US, and then they're going to refuse you. You have to be proactive. So honestly, WeFly, you should get in contact with us. This is a horrible situation that you're in if you've had your visa denied after going to all of these links to prepare to pass your dental board exam. So get in contact with us. We can help you get past this again, okay? In your next interview. This is exactly the kind of case that we specialize in, and I hope that we can help you. So let's move on to another question here. Victoria Ramirez says, after having an F1 visa revoked under 214B, notified by email, is there any hope to get another F1 or a temporary work visa? Have you given someone a visa after having one revoked? It all depends on why your visa was revoked. Everything is about the details, right? A refusal, it's about the details. An issuance, it's about the details. Staying 5 months in the US, it's about the details. So in this case, I would need to know why your visa was revoked, right? Sometimes a visa is revoked because they misspelled your name on the visa. Other times a visa might be revoked because it turns out that you are an internationally wanted criminal, and so they revoke your visa. Two very different situations, and one of them is easier to overcome than the other. So it's all in the details. People like to think that everything is monolithic and universal. Like, oh, I'm in administrative processing, AP. What do I do? Also, it's not universal. There are many different types of administrative processing. Some of them take a shorter amount of time. Some of them take a longer amount of time. Some of them, you have the ability to affect the outcome by sending in additional information. Other ones, you don't. You just have to wait for their process to finish. You won't know what this process is. You'll be asked for information, or you'll be told that you don't need to submit any more information, but you won't be told exactly what's going on. We know from our experience, we know what's going on when we hear what happened in the interview, what documents you were requested to provide, what notification you were given. That's how we are able to infer what's going on, and we can interpret that for you and let you know what timeline you can expect. We can also let you know if there's anything you can do to improve your chances of getting issued at the end of it. But without more details, again, it's all in the details. So let's go on. Thanks, Victoria. Let's move on to another question now. Shabby says, I'm currently in the US on an F1 visa. My girlfriend applied for a B2 and was denied, but she didn't talk about me in interview. Now we tend to get married and apply for F2 visa immediately. Can we get the visa? Okay, I see. So your girlfriend was denied a B2 and didn't talk about you in the interview, and now you want to get married and apply for an F2. Well, if she didn't speak about you in the interview, it could be possible that she put your name into her DS-160, into her application, said she was going to visit you. I'm not sure. But let's just go through a scenario. Let's imagine this. Your girlfriend applies for a visa, a tourist visa, and doesn't mention you anywhere on the visa. Doesn't mention you anywhere on the application or during the interview, doesn't mention you. Just says she wants to go visit Disneyland. Then a month later, she comes back in, and now she says she's married and she's going to visit someone. She's going to visit her husband who's studying in the US. If you were the visa officer, what would you think is happening? I think you'll assume the same thing that I would assume when I was a visa officer, is that this is a person that's just looking for a way to get a visa, right? They're changing the story. All of a sudden, a month ago, there was no mention of this person in the US at all. And now there's a husband in the US all of a sudden, and that's who you're going to go visit. So changing your plan like this, no, it's a bad idea. It's not going to get your visa issued. It's going to categorize you as someone that's trying to get around the rules and think that you can just present applications in a vacuum each time and see if one gets you the visa. Your visa record is cumulative. You don't try one time. Oh, that didn't work. Okay, let me try another time. No. It's cumulative. All your interactions with the visa system add up. They all go into the same record under your name. You're not anonymous. It doesn't matter if you change the embassy or consulate that you go to. It's a computer system. It's connected all over the world, and they will know what you've done in previous interviews. So no, this is not a good plan. Now that she didn't speak about you in the first interview, any mention of you now kind of looks like in the first interview, she was trying to hide the fact that she had a boyfriend in the US because you probably received that bad advice either online or through a shady agent who claims to have expertise but actually does not. They told you, don't talk about that boyfriend in the US. If you mention a boyfriend in the US, you won't get your visa. Well, they've kind of set you up for failure because now you can't mention having a boyfriend in the US, or it looks like you're changing your story a lot. So you got to get it right from the first time. It's important. Don't take bad advice. Don't take cheap advice. Don't take unreliable, inexpert advice. Get real, strong, professional advice from the people that actually worked inside, right? You wouldn't take advice from someone standing outside of a hospital about your medical condition. Right? No, you go into the hospital. You want to find someone, a doctor or nurse, who works in the hospital to get that advice from. In the same way, don't take visa advice from someone who's never been inside the embassy. Take visa advice from people that have worked in the embassy doing the visa interviews, the operations. We're the doctors of the visas. We're the ones that encounter every single visa application and make the decision on it. We are the people that you should trust. Don't trust outsiders that are claiming to provide you with expertise who don't have any real credentials. All right, let's move on to another question here. Guasipa says to us, I have 3 F1 student visa refusals, and now I have a conference to attend in the US. What documentation and tips are needed to get this visa approved? Okay, so what we're looking at here is a case of having multiple prior refusals and now going to the US again. I don't know all the details about this because if you're going to tell me that the last F1 refusal was 2 weeks ago, and now you want to apply for a B visa to attend a conference, well, my advice is going to be much different for you than if you applied for the last F1 visa 3 or 4 years ago, and now you're applying for the conference. Let's go with that scenario. You applied for F1 visas 3 or 4 years ago, and they were refused. Now you've been working, and now you're going to a conference. All right. When you go in for that visa interview, they're going to open up your case, and the first thing that they're going to see are those prior refusals for the F1 visas. Okay, that is a negative piece of information. That's what we call a hurdle. You will encounter that hurdle very near the beginning of the interview because they're going to see this information. But what you have in your benefit is that time has passed since then. Time has passed, and what does that mean? It means that your situation can change. So what you want to do is draw a differentiation between when you were previously refused that F visa and now. It's been 3 or 4 years. Okay, well, how has your career progressed? Have you been in the same job? Have you been able to save some money? Have you gotten promoted? Right? Have you gotten married? Is your life more stable? Are you more financially stable than you were before? All of these things are going to help you drawing a difference between what happened when you were a student, visa applicant, and what you are doing now as a B1, B2 applicant going for a work trip. So it's all about drawing that difference and what's changed over time, right? Now, if there's not very much time that's passed, you've got a much reduced chance of getting your visa issued if you were just refused a third F1 student visa and now you're going in for a B1, B2 visa right afterwards. It also, just like I was talking about in another one of these examples that we've brought up today, it's going to look as if you were just trying to find whatever type of visa might possibly get approved for you to get to the US. So that's going to be much harder. With the time gap there, though, it makes it much easier to draw a distinction. All right, so let's move on to another question here. I'm preparing for F1 visa interview, which is first attempt. Can you please recommend me some tips that I should focus on? So if you're going for an F1 visa interview and it's your first time, great. I'm glad that you're looking for some good advice before you go in for your first visa interview. Because when you go in for your first visa interview and there's no records in the immigration database about you at all, no bad decision has been made against you, that means that you're starting not from a positive spot, but from a neutral spot, which is the best you can ask for. Many people think that what you're doing in a visa interview is you just need to not make a mistake. If you don't make a mistake, you'll get your visa issued. But that's not actually the case. Each visa applicant is assumed to have immigrant intent, which means to be a bad visa applicant who should get refused until the visa applicant can prove to the visa officer that they do indeed meet the qualifications and have the correct intent to use their visa correctly. And that's when the visa officer will issue the visa. So you don't go in thinking that, okay, I just need to say as little as possible and just hope they'll issue the visa. That has worked for some people, but that's gambling. And why gamble when we can take our fate into our own hands and improve our chances, right? I would rather be contributing to my success rather than just rolling the dice and hoping that this visa officer gives me the chance to do what I want without me having any input into that decision at all. So when you go in for this interview, what do you need to do? You need to know your highlights and your hurdles, your positives and your negatives, your strengths and your weaknesses, whatever you want to call it, however you want to envision it. You need to know what's good about your application and what might be considered bad about your application. The reason for that is that when you go in and you're asked what you're going to do in the US, don't give one-word answers, don't give simplistic responses. Give a full narrative story that highlights the strengths in your application that's going to make it easy for the visa officer to approve your visa. Now, those strengths are going to be different for everyone. Some people may be admitted to one of the best universities in the US. Maybe you've been admitted to Harvard or Harvard University, okay? Well, your academic credentials are very strong. That's going to be one of your highlights on your resume, and it's what you should bring up at the very beginning of the visa interview. It doesn't have to be, the best university in the country. It could be just a renowned university in the country. We'll say University of South Carolina. right? A good, well-known state school. It's not the best in the country, but it's also a school that everyone has heard of. So it's got some notoriety, it's got some name recognition. It's going to help you on your application. Some people, though, might be going to a community college or another university that's less well-known, that doesn't have as strict of entry requirements. And so someone in that situation might not want to focus on their academic credentials. You don't go into the interview and say, oh, yes, I'm going to this community college. And then they ask you, well, why did you choose this community college? Don't say things like, oh, they've got a great laboratory and a great student-teacher ratio. These are not the reasons you've chosen a community college, right? You've chosen a community college because either it's cheaper or you didn't have the academic credentials to get into a better university, or it fits some plan of yours that's very specific. It's not because it's the greatest school in the country. So, do away with that type of thinking. You're not going to convince the visa officer that actually this community college has the best computer science program in the country. No one knows about it. It's way better than Stanford, right? No, you're not going to convince them of that. So you want to focus on what are the other highlights of your application, which may be your family's finances. Family's finances are often some of the strongest highlights that someone can present during an application, because people with strong finances usually are not intending to break the U.S. immigration regulations. The strong family finances show that you have a reason to go back to your own country, and that basically the comparison they're making is are your prospects materially better complying with the visa regulations, being in the U.S. temporarily and then going back home, or staying in the U.S. without any type of legal status? And if your situation back home is better than being out of status in the U.S., then they're likely to approve your visa. So that's how you would want to prepare. But you've got to know what your highlights and hurdles are. We've got a lot of videos that you can watch. You can figure out how to assess your situation, but you're never really going to know how a visa officer is going to view those as highlights or hurdles without talking to a former visa officer directly about them. All right. Sriti, I hope that was helpful for you. Let's move on to another question now. Anastasia Mwonga says, hi, how can I answer the question, what changed from your last interview? This is a very good question, because if you've been refused before, it's very likely that you're going to be asked this question when you go in for your visa interview again. The visa officer will scan your passport, and immediately on their screen, they're going to see a notification that says that you've been refused before. The visa officers are told by their managers to make their job easier. If someone has been refused previously and recently, a recent prior refusal, if nothing has changed between that prior refusal and today, then why would you make a different decision? Your colleague, who has the same training as you and ostensibly has the same mental abilities as you, and abilities of deductive reasoning and critical thinking, if they've made the decision to refuse you based on the facts that you presented recently, well, the visa officer today would look at the same facts and make the same decision, right? This is just a heuristic method for making their job easier so that they're not having to devote more resources. They want to maintain consistency. It's not a legal requirement, though. They're not legally required to refuse you again after you've been refused previously. There's no legal requirement that a certain amount of time must pass between a refusal and then an issuance. It's just administratively expedient for them to have that, not necessarily policy, but let's say that that guideline. So what is the visa officer looking for when they ask that question? What's changed since the last interview? Well, they're looking for the same thing they're always looking for, which is the easiest way to make the decision. They want the decision to be easy. They want the decision to be immediately apparent. They want to talk to you, and in the first 10 seconds, they want it to be very obvious that they should either issue you your visa or refuse your visa. That's what they're looking for. So if you can help them get to that point where it's obvious what the decision should be, then you're helping yourself. So when they ask this question, they're looking for, well, one answer they're looking for is if you just say, no, nothing's changed. If you say, no, nothing's changed, you're basically just saying, please, officer, give me the same refusal that you gave me last time. That's how they will interpret that. They might ask one or two more questions, but if you say nothing has changed, you're basically just signing your own refusal. What do you need to tell them? Let's say that it's only been 1 week and nothing has changed. Does that mean that you should just say nothing has changed? No. I'm going to go back to this concept of the highlights that you need to know. Just because nothing's changed in your situation doesn't mean that the information you're going to give them hasn't changed. In your previous interview, maybe you were very passive. Maybe they asked you a few questions and you just answered business administration, XYZ college, and my father is in agriculture, right? Maybe those were your answers. Not very fulsome answers, not a lot of information there for them to go on. What might be a better answer to all of those? Or how about this? Let's say that your father works in agriculture, but he's not a farmhand. He is the owner of 800 acres of farmland. Okay, a much bigger difference, even though both of those are considered in the agriculture sector. So what are you going to do when you go into the next interview and they say, what's changed from your last interview? You're going to say, well, my father owns a farm that is 800 acres and has 70 workers on it. So I'm not sure why I was refused before, because my family is very stable and comfortable financially, and they can afford to pay for me to go to XYZ college to study business administration. The answer is not necessarily the answer to the question that was asked. However, once you've given them that information, they can't take it out of their head. It's in their mind. That highlight that you've given them, the large estate, the large farm, which is going to be significant income, which is going to be significant stability, and a tie in your home country, which is going to incentivize you to comply with the visa regulations, that's already in their mind. And they're not just going to say, oh, that was not technically and grammatically the answer to the question that I asked, therefore I shall refuse this youngster's visa. No, that's not what they're going to think. Then they're going to think, oh, that's a lot of land. I wonder why they were refused. The visa officers want to make the right decisions. They want to make the right decisions. They want to do their jobs well. They also have to do their jobs quickly. What that means is that they're not spending 20 minutes trying to get every piece of information from you to then distill it down and make the most considered decision possible. No, they have to make the best possible decision that they can make based on very limited information that they get within just a few minutes' time. So you have to make sure that the information that you're giving them within those very few minutes, those very few responses to questions that you're allowed, you have to make sure that you're giving them the information that makes their job easy, that makes it apparent that issuance is the answer that they're looking for. All right, let's move on to another question now. Abdul Sabur says, I am a doctor and I've been refused a J1 visa exchange visitor visa. I am more interested in the research field of medicine rather than the clinical part, but I do not know why I was refused. I would have to know more about this. J1 visas have a relatively low refusal rate, especially if you are a visiting physician. There's a very low refusal rate for that category of J visa. The J visa, there's a lot of different categories. There's visiting scholars, there's visiting physicians, visiting researchers, there's summer work and travel, there's au pairs, there's trainees, there's a lot of different categories, and they're viewed differently. Some of them are viewed more positively and have a higher issuance rate, and some of them have a lower issuance rate. A physician on a J visa, I'm assuming, is going to be a visiting physician, and that usually has a high issuance rate. So if you've been refused, there must be some extraordinary reason, and I would need to get more into the details of what happened in your interview, what questions were asked, how did you answer those questions, what documents did they want to look at, did they just refuse you immediately? If they did, what did they say? Did they 2-1G you and ask you for more information? So Abdel Sabur, I would say get in touch with us. I'm sure that there's a lot on the line with you being able to get to the U.S. to get that J1 visa for your program there. So get in touch with us, schedule an appointment with one of us. It could be with me, it could be with one of my colleagues who may have worked in your country, who knows exactly how it's going to work in your country and what considerations are being taken into account. when you go in for that visa interview, get in touch with us. This is the kind of case that we can help you with, for sure. Looking forward to getting your booking and meeting with you later. All right, let's move on to another question now. Samuel Amanga says, what is the best answer to this question? Why did you choose this school? Why did you choose the University of New Haven? So when you think about any of the questions, there are very few questions where you want to have an answer prepared for that question. You want to have an answer prepared for the first question. It doesn't matter what the first question is, because you really want to have something prepared to tell them and not just say study or student, right? This stuff doesn't help you. They already know you're going to study. So you want to prepare to tell them what your highlight is. Also, if you do have a hurdle, let's say that you had a visa canceled at some point, right? You know that they're going to ask you about this. So you want to prepare what you're going to tell them. It needs to be concise. It needs to be comprehensive and informative, and presented in the most straightforward, forthright manner, so that you create some rapport, and that you're a trustworthy person by telling them, but also that you get all the information to them. The visa officers need to have all the information. They need to believe they have all the information before they're confident enough to issue the visa. So the question, why did you choose this school? Whenever we hear other questions, we need to think, what's their motivation for asking this question? The visa officers ask lots of different questions, but it's not because they have a checklist. They don't have a checklist where they're going through and saying, okay, well, I've asked that question, now I need the next question. No. The visa officers ask questions based on whatever the answers to the previous question were, and they're trying to get information from you that gives them the confidence to either issue or refuse your visa. They're just trying to get any information from you at all, right? They want to know, okay, are you a good student? Okay, are you financially stable? Right? What is your intent? Now, that question, though, isn't really useful. If you just say to a visa applicant, please demonstrate your intent to use your visa according to the law, please. The visa applicant's not going to know what to say. So they ask these more direct and pointed questions like, why did you choose this school? Hoping that the answer is going to shed some light on your motivations and your intent to use the visa. So when you choose this school, don't give some type of rote answer that is a combination of facts that you gleaned from the school's website and Wikipedia. A bad answer to this question that is very common is, I chose this school because they have a campus of 120 acres and an endowment of $300 million and a student faculty ratio of 18 to 1. This is a horrible answer. That is not the reason anyone chooses a school to go to. That is, those are interesting facts about a school that you read about after you've already chosen that school to attend. And then you were preparing for a visa interview, so you went to Wikipedia and you memorized a few facts about it. The reason people choose to go to schools can be various, but among them are, it's the best school that I could get into. Many students want to go to the best school that they can get into. Other times this is the school that's the best school for the type of program that I'm going into. Maybe this is the best program, the best school for the program that I want to get into. It's the best one I could get into, right? So that's all, a variation on trying to excel to the highest, going to the best thing that you are able to get into. Other times it might be because of the price, right? I applied to multiple universities, but I chose this one because they've got the lowest tuition, or they give me a scholarship, or they give me a graduate assistantship that's going to be partially funding my studies. These are the reasons why Americans, and including the visa officers, these are the reasons why they chose the schools that they attended. So yes, you should stick with these real reasons. Sometimes you chose a school because a friend or someone that you know, or a friend's friend, went to that school, or that there's other people from your country that went there and you got some recommendations, or maybe there was an educational consultant, or there was a university fair and 5 schools from the US came and you talked to all of them and this is the one that you liked. These are all real reasons. And those are the reasons you should talk about. They're just trying to see, are you credible, right? And if you never give any real human flavor to anything that you're telling them, they're not going to trust you. So that's what you should take into account when you're answering this question or any other question that they ask you. Let's move on to another question. Sir, firstly, I've applied for F1 visa and got refused. Could I apply for a B2 now? Yes, you can always apply for a visa again. However, if you apply for an F1 last week and you've got a plan to go and study engineering in the US, and now you got refused, and now you say, actually, now I just want to go on vacation for a little bit, they are going to refuse your visa. If you're just trying to get any type of visa issued in that short time frame, you have to think about it. It's not just one application, then another application, right? All this information is in their records. They're going to see, okay, well, you were just here last week saying you wanted to study at, Nexus Valley Vocational School, and now you're saying I want to go to Six Flags on vacation. It doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Unless they tie that together and they think, oh, the goal is actually just to arrive in the US. One F visa application to try to refuse. Okay, so now let's try a B2 application to do that. So that's going to be a hurdle for you if you're trying to do that. Let's move on to another question here. Okay. I was refused for my M1 visa. An M1 visa is a student visa for vocational training. Usually pilots, chefs, and a couple other categories of students fall under that visa category. I'm planning to reapply instantly with the same profile. Good. Last time, my father is only one sponsor, but this time I'm adding my grandfather and my mother. Is it okay? Okay, so applying with the same profile is a good idea because changing individual data points in your application, I'm going to change this phone number, I'm going to change this name, I'm going to change this address. That doesn't matter. That's not what they're making their decision on. But now you're talking about the sponsor. The sponsor is also just another data point that's on the application. It's just a name. It's just 2 words, 3 words that you write there on the DS-160. They did not refuse your visa because of the name of the sponsor that you wrote on your application. They refused you because of how you presented your information during your interview. Do not, and I've given this information so many times, there's 2 horrible pieces of perfidious misinformation that are out there among the visa applicants and spread around. One is to be quiet and don't say anything during your visa interview. That's the number 1 worst piece of advice out there. The number 2 misleading piece of advice is that this sponsor is so important and everyone's focusing on the sponsor. And, oh, I applied with my father as my sponsor, but I got refused. So now I'm going to transfer my entire family's assets into my mother's bank account and then apply again. And then they're going to issue my visa. No, they're not. They don't care whose name is the sponsor. They care about what is your total and comprehensive financial situation. They care about how you present that to them during the visa interview. You have to go into the visa interview and you're asked, who's your sponsor? Don't say my father, my mother. No, you have to say, my family will be paying for this. My father does this job. My mother does this job. They have this much in real estate and this much in total assets. So our life is very comfortable and they're able to pay for my education. This is the way that you present, generally, your total financial situation. Do not just look for one name to say, hoping that somehow there's a list of names in a database that if you say the right name, you'll get your visa issued. That is not how it works. Okay? So sponsors, remember, everyone that's watching, I know that we've got a lot of people tuned in right now. The sponsor is just one aspect of your total financial situation. And you should never just talk about one sponsor. You should always talk about your comprehensive, total, complete financial situation. Okay, let's move on to another question. Sylvie says, I'm a citizen of Kenya, currently living and working in Latvia. I have a residency permit. I'm planning to go study in the US and then go back to Kenya. Is it okay for me to do my visa interview in Latvia? Yes, it is. So you're bringing up the concept of a third country national. So a third country national is someone who's applying for a visa outside of their country where they hold a passport. So you're from Kenya. If you apply for a visa anywhere outside of Kenya, you're going to be considered a third country national. Now, how does that affect your visa interview? When you go into the visa interview and the visa officer there, let's say in Latvia, uh, takes your passport, well, they're used to taking passports from people that say, Latvia on the passport. That's what they do all day long, every day. And they are very familiar with how they adjudicate visas for people from Latvia. And they're not familiar with how they adjudicate visas for people from other countries. So when they see Kenya written on the passport instead of Latvia, all of a sudden their level of confidence, their level of trust in their own ability to identify a good and bad visa applicant, to identify your true intent and your propensity to use your visa well and then leave the U.S. at the end of your stay, is much decreased. What does that mean for you? In simple terms, it means that your probability of getting your visa is less as a third country national. Sometimes it's inevitable, though. Sometimes you have to apply as a third country national. So if you do, you have to take into account some things. In your case, you've got a residency permit in Latvia. Okay, that's good because you didn't just show up, you didn't just fly to Latvia to apply. So if you're from Kenya and you just said, oh, well, there's no visa appointments in Kenya, I'm going to fly to Dubai. And you show up to Dubai and they say, well, do you live in Dubai? And you say, no, I don't. I just came here for the visa interview. They're going to be thinking, well, I have no idea about Kenya. I don't know anything about Kenya or the visa applicants there. You don't live in Dubai, which is where I'm trained to adjudicate visa applicants. So I don't know what to do in this situation. And they're more likely to refuse you. In your case, you have a reason to be in Latvia. You've got a residence permit there. So when they say, well, why are you applying here? I have a residence permit here, right? I currently live and work in Latvia. I've been here for X number of years. I've been working in this field, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, you can apply in Latvia and you do have a reason to be there. You'll still have a higher bar to get over. You're going to have a higher threshold to overcome than the local Latvians, just because you have a different passport. So it still may be the best thing for you to go to Kenya to apply if it's convenient. Why? Because in Latvia, you're being compared against all the other Latvian visa applicants who are locals, who the visa officers are very familiar with. And then you're different. If you go back to Kenya, though, you're not just the same, you've got a more impressive travel record than most of the Kenyan visa applicants because you have a foreign residency permit in Europe. You've been living and working there for a number of years. So all of a sudden, you're back in a place where they understand, they see this Kenyan passport, they think, okay, yeah, I know Kenyans, but oh, wow, look at that. Okay, so, say European residents and working there for a few years. All of a sudden, you've made your chances much better because in comparison to the other applicants that you're next to before and after you in line, you're going to have a stronger application. All right, hope that helps you, Sylvie. So let's move on to another question now. Please give a step-by-step process on how a spouse who's an American citizen should file an I-130 petition using direct consular filing in Ghana. This is not what we do. We do not file petitions for people. We are visa interview experts. We do not help file paperwork. For paperwork and petitions, you will in most cases need to employ the services of a U.S. immigration attorney. We are former visa officers, and what our specialty is that part of the process, which is a black box to everyone, including many immigration attorneys, which is the visa interview, that everyone knows is so important that the final decision is made there, and it's not contestable, but most people do not know why a decision is made one way or another in that visa interview. So for filing the petitions, you will have to go through a U.S. immigration attorney. But when it gets to the phase of the visa interview, that's when we can help you. You have a second part to your question here. Can a previous denial in an NIV affect your IV? So can an NIV, I'll interpret that for you, that's a non-immigrant visa. So can a previous tourist visa denial affect your spouse green card visa interview? If it's just 214B because they suspected immigrant intent, it will not affect your interview in a bad way. If you committed any type of fraud, it will affect it in a bad way. Okay, but just a refusal in general does not mean that there's going to be a negative effect. It's the details that matter. David, I hope that was helpful for you. Let's move on to another question here. KLH tells us, I overstayed in the US as a kid, and now that I'm an adult trying to travel, they said I need a visa. Will overstaying as a kid make my chances of getting a visa harder? Yes. It's because your entire visa record will be considered when you go into the visa interview. I have a client that I helped with this exact problem. She was taken to the US by her parents when she was a minor, and they stayed in the US on tourist visas for many years. I think something like 8 years. Then she left the US, right? So she was taken to the US as a child. This is not something that is held against you in a direct way. Indirectly, it will be held against you. In a direct way, no. They will not blame you for that decision, right? You cannot be blamed for the decision that your parents made while you were a minor. What you can be blamed for is anything that you do after the age of 18, including staying in the US if you were taken there before you were 18. And you will also be guilty by association, right? So basically, they're saying, yes, your parents did this. However, this is still indicative of the family that you belong to and what your general motivations and intentions might be. So that's the indirect way that it's going to be that it's going to affect you. So depending on how young you were when you were a kid and when you went to the U.S. and you overstayed, how long ago that has been. If that was 10 years ago, that's going to be much better than if that was 6 months ago. Also, if you had left the U.S. before you became an adult, that's going to matter. Where your parents are now is going to matter. I would say the key here is to not ignore this situation. The key is going to be to know how you want to explain this, how you want to present it, and then at the very beginning of the visa interview, taking the initiative and presenting that narrative to the visa officer. If you do not present your narrative, what you're doing is you're leaving it to chance, and the visa officer is going to create the narrative in their mind for themselves. They're going to say, what's your purpose of travel to the US? And you'll say tourism, and then they start clicking through your case. Now, you will have to have said that you were in the US on your visa application. They're also going to see this record. So they're going to know that you were in the US for a number of, let's say, years in your case. I'm not sure exactly how much time you were there. Well, you haven't mentioned this to them yet. So they're just seeing, 800-day stay in the US. And because you've not explained your version of the events to them yet, they immediately get to form their own story. And once they get a story in their mind, this is just general psychologically, it's much harder to displace that idea that they've already formed in their mind than if you put the first idea into their mind. So instead of being passive and waiting for them to ask about this after they already have a pretty good idea that they're going to think about it very negatively, you come in and you say, well, I'm applying for a tourist visa, but actually I've got to tell you, my parents took me to the US when I was X number of years old, and we stayed there for X number of years, and so we were out of status. But now I'm an adult, and this is what I've done with my life, and my situation is different than my parents was when they took me to the US. So in my situation, it's completely different. That's how you're going to have to present that. Kaylee, I hope that was very helpful for you. Let's move on and get a few more questions in here today. We're getting quite a few comments. We're up to 920. I hope we get 1,000 comments today. That's going to be a very good day. I know I'm glad that travel's picking up. A lot more people are having visa interviews. A lot more people are tuning in, getting the information that they need in order to pass their visa interview. Mo says to us, what's favorable to get a J1 visa? Being married or single? Is the status of divorce can affect the chance of acceptance by any means? For a J visa, being married or single does not matter. Being divorced does not matter. Like I said, for the J visa, there are many different categories. If you are going for, let's say, one of the categories that's probably got a higher refusal rate is the trainee category. Well, you're going to have to demonstrate a whole lot more stability financially and intent to return to your own country to live than you would if you're applying for a J1 to be a visiting researcher at a university, right? So there's different strata of J1 visas that are going to have different average refusal rates. But being married or single does not matter. All right, let's move on to another one. Let's get some good information out here for everyone that's tuned in. Harry says, I did a mistake on my DS-160. The joining date of my college is 2021, and I failed 2019. I was going for my training in culinary purpose under J1. Can I correct it to 2021? Yes, if you have not yet attended your visa interview and you've made a slight data entry error on your DS-160, what you should do is fill out a new DS-160 and print the DS-160 confirmation page. Then, when you go to your visa interview, you take that new DS-160 confirmation page, and when you get to the intake process at the embassy or the consulate, you give the local staff your DS-160 confirmation page for the new corrected DS-160, and you say, I made a mistake on my DS-160. I filled out a new one. I would like to add this new one to my application, and they will add the new one to your application. Do not do this multiple times. Don't fill it out over and over again. Try to do it correctly the first time, because you're creating a mess if you do this multiple times. But if you've made a mistake that's going to be bad for you during the interview, yes, you need to correct that. Now, you should not go in and change names of who your contact person is in the US. Things like that are going to lead to suspicion that you're trying to change information. But if obviously the date that you went to college is wrong, and that's why you filled out a new application, that's going to be perfectly good. And you want your dates to be chronological and all in order. Let me take this opportunity to also talk about that. When you put your work history and educational history on your DS-160, this is not a job resume. You're not putting the most impressive, most relevant experience. You're putting all the experience. So it's different from a job resume. It's a chronological accounting of all your activities. So you should not have gaps. You should put everything that you have done. Internships, anything that you've done, you need to put it all on there. All right, let's move on. Let's go on to another question here. Mahdi Rahman says, I have my F1 visa interview tomorrow. Can I get some tips? Yes, it's tomorrow. Well, it's too late for you to do very much, but depending on what your situation is, you need to identify what your highlights and your hurdles are. If you need help with that, you need to schedule a consultation with the next visa officer at Argo, because you need to focus on your highlights and you need to know how to defend yourself against your hurdles. All right, let's move on to another one. Hi, I'm preparing for my first interview for an H4 spouse visa. Tips, please. Again, the devil's in the details. If you're an H4 spouse, that means that you're a spouse of an H visa employee, but that could be an H1B, it could be an H2A, it could be an H2B, or it could be an H3. So in each of those cases, you're going to have different requirements. As the spouse, the main requirement is going to be that you are the spouse of the primary employee who's on the H1, 2, or 3 visa. However, for the H1, 2, and 3 spouses, it's going to be different for you. If you're the spouse of an H1B, your refusal rate is going to be extremely low, because an H1B is a very highly qualified professional applicant that doesn't have very much instance of misuse at all that I know of. If it's been approved, then it's almost assured that the H4 spouse of an H1B will be approved, as long as the H4 spouse does not have anything derogatory on their record. If you're the H4 spouse and you overstayed in the US previously, you're going to have a problem. But nothing about your spouse's situation will change that. Now, H2As and H2Bs, which are temporary workers in the US, seasonal workers in agriculture and other industries, they might have a harder time, because those are not such financially stable or professional or prestigious work placements. And so the spouses might be seen as perhaps also having the intent to go to the US and stay there to work in an undocumented status after the visa expires. So it depends on the details here as well. Nadia, let's move on to another question here. My sponsor is my brother-in-law. He owns the company I currently work for, and my sister is also a director of the company. Is this a good profile for sponsorship? I don't know what kind of sponsorship you're talking about here. Are we talking about a work sponsorship? Are we talking about an F1 visa sponsorship? It's a family company. You know, this is a question where I can't really give you any information because I don't know what you're talking about. So we're just going to move on to another question here. Planning to reapply in Philippines for an F1 visa for AS in nursing, sponsored by a U.S. family friend, non-relative. Immediate family just immigrated recently in California. I'm unemployed and haven't studied since denial. So you've been denied. Let's move on to one that's a little bit more precise. Let's move on to a question that's going to be a little bit more precise for us to answer here. Okay. I was refused for an F1 visa. Can I apply for an H1B? Yes, you can. There's a big difference between F1 visas and H1Bs. An F1 visa can be refused under 214B, which is the refusal code that the visa officers can use to refuse anyone they want to refuse for any reason. They don't have to have justification for it at all. They can just say, I am not convinced that you intend to use the visa well, and they can refuse you. For an H1B visa, that is not the case. For an H1B visa, 214B, that refusal code does not apply. So if a visa officer wants to refuse your H1B visa, they either have to refuse you under what we call a hard ineligibility, which is to say that you actually have committed some act that makes you ineligible for a visa. This could be overstaying in the U.S. and accruing unlawful presence in the past, committing a crime involving moral turpitude that results in a ban, having committed fraud sometime in the past, being a human smuggler. There's a number of these ineligibilities. It could also be because this job is not immediately approvable, that they feel that there is something wrong with either the job or your qualifications for the job. If that's the case, they can't just refuse you very simply. They have to send back this petition for revocation. It's a much more difficult process. The standard for them doing that is much higher. So yes, if you've been refused an F visa, you can 100% apply for an H1B. I would be prepared to present myself as the real expert, the specialized employee that I need to be for the H1B, because they will see that prior refusal and think, oh, we refused someone for an F1 visa. Why would we have done that if they're so qualified that they can get an H1B? So there's going to be some cognitive dissonance for you to clear up for the visa officer. So be prepared to be proactive in that situation. Let's take one. Okay, I don't understand what this question means. So let's wrap that up for today. Thanks, everybody. I hope that this was a very informative live for you. I hope that everybody got a lot of information. I tried to answer your specific questions. I tried to give you a lot of general context so that you would be able to take some of those specific questions and then apply it to your own situation. I'm sure that everyone out there that's watching, though, is saying to themselves, but what about my situation? What about my question? What about my interview? There is an answer to that question. There's a solution. There's a way for you to get that information, and that's by going to argovisa.com. You're going to find the link in the caption in our profile. You can go there. You can sign up for a visa consultation with a former visa officer who's going to take your specific situation into account, give you a specialized, customized strategy for going into your visa interview to maximize your chances of success. All right. Good luck to everybody. Hope everybody's having great success applying for their interviews. We're getting close to student visa season, and hope it goes well for everybody. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you next time.